Good morning, everyone. As you all are filing in, feel free to drop where you're coming from in the chat so we can get a sense of where you all are. I know it's morning for some of us, afternoon for others, so welcome, and we'll get started in a few minutes. And I want to welcome you to Bringing Everyone to the Table, Fostering a Diverse and Inclusive Culture in Civic Tech. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of housekeeping. There we go. And so this, first I'm going to start out with our code of conduct. This is something that applies to all Code for America gatherings, this one included, and we want to ensure that we foster a safe space. And my colleagues have dropped a link to our code of conduct in the chat. And if you can't access it there, please feel free to follow this link. And if there are any violations, please feel free to contact us directly at safespace@codeforamerica.org. And then moving on to questions, we would love to hear from each and every one of you. And so please use the Q&A section to submit any questions, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. And lastly, we want to continue the conversation with you. So please share your thoughts about the panel, either during this event or after, with us on Twitter. Our handle is @Code4America. And you can also use the CFA Summit hashtag as well. So to kick this all off, we would love to get a sense of who's in the room. So we're going to ask you first what sector you're coming from. And then we're going to move on to a second poll, just kind of getting a feel for whether you work in civic tech now, aspire to work in civic tech, or have worked in civic tech in the past. All right, we're getting the poll warmed up. So, oh, there we go. Oh, it keeps switching. All right. Looks like we have a good mix of government, nonprofit, and for-profit, as well as volunteers. So great to see you all in the room. Welcome. I'm so glad you took your time out this morning to join us. All right. Looks like almost everyone has. All right. All right. And then I think we'll move into the next poll. All right, thank you all. It's great to have you all in the Zooms. So now on to today's panel. We recognize that in order to build more equitable outcomes for the people that we serve, we must always be thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplace and in our work. Given the state of our country right now, and as leaders in the space, we believe it is even more important to drive these conversations forward and push ourselves to always be thinking about how we foster a diverse and inclusive culture in civic tech and beyond. So we're thrilled to have you all join us in this conversation, and I would love to introduce you to our moderator, Deena McKay. Deena is the founder and host of the podcast, Black Tech Unplugged. Black Tech Unplugged is a podcast that highlights Blacks who innovate and work in the tech industry. On the podcast, she features those working on the corporate side of the industry as well as tech entrepreneurs. Additionally, Deena is a fellow technologist, speaker, but most importantly, today, she is our moderator for our conversation. Welcome, Deena, and thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for the introduction, Javita. So, hi everyone. As Javita mentioned, my name is Deena McKay. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the moderator for today's conversation around fostering a diverse and inclusive culture in civic tech. I do want to remind you of one housekeeping rule that Javita already mentioned, but I want to make sure that we're all aligned in regards to questions. If you have any questions for the panelists or even myself, please send it in the Zoom chat. We're going to use the last 10 minutes of our conversation today to answer your questions. So, to get started today, I am joined by three amazing panelists and leaders from Code for America, U.S. Digital Service, and Coding It Forward. They're going to go into detail about how they got into the civic tech sector, as well as how their organizations are handling current issues such as COVID and the racial injustices and disparities. So if you guys are excited and ready to get the conversation started, let me see you put yes in the Zoom chat right now. Awesome, I see some yeses coming through. Awesome, so let's get started. So we have three amazing individuals that are a part of this panel today. And I'm going to have them start off with an introduction. So let's start with Zarin Sarpangal. She's the Chief Financial and People Officer for Code America. So Zarin, do you care to do an introduction of your role and then also how you got into civic tech?
Sure, happy to, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Zarin Sarpangal. My pronouns are she, her. And my journey into civic tech was a bit roundabout. I have always really been focused on working at mission-driven organizations that enable social change. So I was in the private sector prior to this, working at a biopharmaceutical company, which was developing antibiotics for resistant bacteria, which is definitely a public health need. And I saw the pros and cons of what it meant to be a for-profit, publicly traded company when I was working on that public health mission. And so was pretty excited to come to Code for America because we're a nonprofit. And I really like the mix of both technology, which I think can have a huge impact on human life, with government, which serves so many people in our country. So for me, when they wanted a finance and people leader at Code for America and hired me, I felt like I hit the jackpot and still feel that way a year and a half into the role.
Great, thanks, Zarin. Next up, I want to introduce Andrea Visa. She's the Director of Talent at the United States Digital Service. Andrea, care to introduce yourself?
Hi, Deena. I'm Andrea Visa. I lead all of our talent and people initiatives at USDS, and I fell into civic tech. I started as a recruiter and really had a passion connecting with people, understanding their stories, and then helping them take that next step in their careers. And after doing that for over 4 years, I found USDS from one of our current recruiters who's amazing, and really aligned with the mission that just incorporated my love of recruiting on top of that. And for the last year and a half, I've been leading our talent team here and really focusing on improving just the people experience here. So everything from talent management, our recruiting strategy, event strategy, data analytics, and also just that transition piece into their journey after USDS.
Great, thank you for your intro. And last but never least, we have Chris Quang, co-founder and director of operations for Coding It Forward. Chris, tell the audience a little bit about yourself today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deena, and so great to be here. My name is Chris Quang. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I work as one of the co-founders and as director of operations for Coding It Forward. So my journey in civic tech, I think, started in a class when I was still an undergraduate, learning about the fantastic organizations, USDS, Code for America. I think one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here, and seeing that those two organizations weren't necessarily as reachable or accessible for young people. And so as someone who had an interest, a passion in technology, but also in public service and civic engagement, wanted to create a space where young people like me who are in college or just out of it could find civic tech as an attractive opportunity. And so came together with a couple of peers and launched Coding It Forward about 3.5 years. And now we're really just working to show young people that working in civic tech is a really fantastic place to be.
And Chris, that is a great segue because we're going to dive into some of those facts in regards to how to get people into the civic tech sector. And to begin our conversation, so we've been using the term civic tech a lot, right? And so I wanted to define civic tech. So one thing that I found while doing some research was that Forbes said that there's technically no industry standard for the definition of civic tech. There's some broadly defined definitions out there, and it's thought of as technologies that are deployed to enhance the relationship between people and government by giving them more of a voice to participate in public decision making and or to improve the delivery of services. So for the sake of today's conversation, I want to ask each of the panelists to take a moment and explain what civic tech means to you. And let's start with Zarin.
Sure, yeah, I think for me, and Deena, the definition you just shared, which I think Omidyar also references a lot, at the heart of it, that is what civic tech really is, right? At the heart of it, civic tech is about how, for me, you use technology and deploy it in a thoughtful, respectful, dignified way so that people can have an experience with government services that is different and much better than sometimes how you think about traditional government services. And technology is at the heart of what has brought about a lot of great change on how people interact with various other services that we have right now, and we can bring that to government at the moment. So for me, it's civic tech is pretty core to how we can equitably distribute services and make them a lot more accessible to people who are interacting with government and reach people who may have been marginalized in a way that we probably couldn't otherwise.
Great. Chris, what about from your perspective? What is civic tech?
Yeah, definitely. I think Zarin hit on a bunch of the big things and the aspiration that interacting with government, receiving government services can be as efficient, enjoyable, even as many of the digital experiences that we have in our day-to-day lives, whether it's ordering something off of Amazon or anything like that. There's no reason why getting access to social services or filing for unemployment should be any different. And I think there's another element that I like to think about with civic tech is there's a lot of work that's being done that might not be public facing, but working with the dedicated expert career civil servants who've spent years, if not decades, inside government, and working with them to make sure that they have the tools and the modern software that they can use to do their jobs effectively and ultimately better serve everyday Americans. So I think that's an important element as well.
And Andrea, what about yourself?
Definitely, I think reiterating on the points Zarin and Chris made, but I would just say focusing on the people. So it could be the civil servants and the back end support, but then also the American citizens and improving their experience. So it really is just the culmination of government, technology, and then people all coming together.
And Andrea, I love that you say people, because one of the things that I've experienced from talking to you all, but also from individuals I know who work in civic tech, the workplace environment, the reputation that it has is that everyone is friendly and welcoming, which, as we know, might be a different reputation than some of the corporate counterparts that we experience. So I want to dive into why is that? Why are the people so friendly and welcoming in civic tech environments?
I'll answer first. I think it's at USDS, it's a few things. So one of our core values is go where the work is. And so, not at this time, given everything, but we ask and require individuals to pick up and move to DC to join our cause. And so I think that camaraderie that comes about with that is that we're all in this together. We're all pushing to make a change together. It really builds this like crazy bond with your colleagues that you could work with just for 6 months, maybe a few years, but it feels like such a long time. You've gone through so much together. But then I think at just like a higher level, everyone is so passionate about the work that they're doing and creating a change, a positive change in the world. And just that, it's infectious and welcoming and inviting. So I don't know, everyone's just so great.
I'll build on what Andrea just said. I think, we attract really good mission-oriented people, right? Like you get engineers who want to work in social good. And we say like what we're trying to hire is really hire motivated change agents that want to have meaningful results. And as a result, you're naturally going to attract people who care deeply about this work. And that I think has a lot to do with creating a friendly and welcoming culture. I think the other things around it is there is usually a really intentional focus on inclusion, which I'm sure we're going to get to in civic tech. But those things also create an environment where people feel welcomed in the work that they're doing and really feel like they belong and can contribute meaningfully. And similar to Andrea, like one of our core values is empathy is our operating system, right? And so we look for people who have either a collaborative mindset, those that can put people at the center of the work that they're doing as you're hiring, and that leads into and bleeds into the culture that you're creating in the organization.
And I think just to chime in as someone that is still, I think, fairly new to civic tech, the warmth has always been something that has been so attractive. And I think it is shown why the civic tech space has grown so much. And I think thinking about my peers who maybe are graduating from college, they have so many options, and no one is coming into civic tech because they're looking to strike it rich, or they're thinking that this is going to necessarily be the way for them to live that lifestyle, but they're doing it because they show up. And I think they're doing it feeling empowered by the people who are already in the space. And I remember just having conversations, so many people as a student saying, hey, I'm trying to learn about what civic tech is. I took one class and I can't get enough. And so many people were so willing to take time and grab coffee or to chat about their experiences. And it made me feel so welcomed that so much of what we try to do at Coding It Forward is extend that. We had an open door for our team. How could we extend that for so many more young people? And I think that has just been one of the most fantastic parts of working in civic tech is the people.
And all of your responses were wonderful. And from an organizational standpoint, one thing that every single one of you mentioned was core values and how the core values helped to create that environment. And one thing that I want to even take a step further into is let's go into more details about how each of your organizations is taking that conscious approach. So how are they building culture in your environments? We know that things have to start from the top down, but what are some of the things that are maybe even everyday things or long-term things that you are implementing within your culture to do that? Darren, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. And I think, to me, and in our organization, culture is really a fabric of a lot of day-to-day actions that you take, and you have to be intentional about it, right? So starting with your values is useful, right? Around what does it really mean to bring empathy to life in the organization. But I think a couple things that I want to say that we are trying to do as examples is, as a way to foster an inclusive culture, is one is like, let's introduce ourselves and say your preferred pronouns, right? Like it's a small act, but I remember joining the organization and it feeling incredibly powerful and welcoming coming from an organization that didn't really necessarily even think about that, right? Like it just was a signal that I could express myself holistically into this group. So that's one. We have a DEI committee, and we've tried to be really intentional about how can we be inclusive in meetings. So can we send agendas ahead of time? Can we make sure different people are being note takers, right? And those minor things do foster a culture of inclusivity. Or even previously when we were even all together, like we would all Zoom into our meetings, even if we were in the same room, because if there was one person that was remote, we didn't want them to feel left out, right? And that there was a conversation happening separately. We also have a culture committee and others in the organization that foster how do we keep connected as team members together, right? So it could be things like when we were all together, we would have tea or chai, right, together at the office, or food was very big in our organization and different people would cook even in our little kitchen. Or like we would do a day of service, right, where it was a good way for us to come together. And this year we're doing it around voting and trying to do it remotely to encourage people. And the last thing I'd say is like, how do you really celebrate successes and share connections through the organization? So we have weekly wins every week, which is on Friday, where all of us get together. And it's a lovely way to like really celebrate and acknowledge everything that's going on in the organization and create connections so people can see themselves in different elements of the work and the connectivity between it. So I'd say small things make a big difference with culture, and you can put some things together in place that foster it.
I think for Coding It Forward, culture functions a little bit differently just because we're a small organization. There are 3 of us who work full time, but we support big influxes of students in maybe 10 or 12-week cycles a couple of times a year. And so for us, when we're bringing a lot of people who don't know each other, they're coming from different colleges, different universities, how can you create culture in such a short period of time? And I think for us, it really comes down to creating space and making sure that people feel welcome, that this is a space that is theirs. And we pride ourselves for being kind of for young people, by young people. And I think in civic tech broadly, one of the things that we've heard from our fellows is that they don't necessarily have a space on their campuses or in their computer science departments to be having difficult conversations about technology, whether it's ethics, whether it's how technology can be used as a tool to oppress, and making sure that we create space for fellows to have conversations with like-minded peers. And I think what Zarin said about celebrating wins, wanting to make sure that working in government is hard. I think especially if you're just in school. And so if you're struggling, but if you've gotten past a hurdle, making sure that you can celebrate that, making sure your fellows can help you recognize the hard work that you're putting day in and day out are just, I think, 2 of the things that have really created a culture for us in a short period of time.
And then I'll just briefly add, I think USDS, we are positioned a little differently. And like I mentioned in the last answer, we have previously required everyone to move to DC. So right now we are in a culture shift. How do we go from a completely in-office environment where we're engaging every day? My background is actually our office space where we used to just hang out, and to being completely remote. And so that is something that we are iterating on with every new hire cohort. We've had a lot of new individuals join us during this time, which has been great, but how does that culture translate to new people joining us? And so, you know, we have our weekly staff meetings where we highlight wins. We have agency teams kind of break down the work that they're doing because, you know, some things are, you know, shorter term engagements, longer term engagements. And, you know, now since we are so separate, how do we stay connected with the work and the people who we used to see every single day? And I'll just say one of my favorite new pastimes, we've always had a kudos, which is like a celebration where you can anonymously recognize your colleagues, and now it's become themed because of Zoom. And so that is something that's very entertaining, and I think people have come to really look forward to every week.
And Andrea, you bring up a very, very important point, because let's talk about COVID a little bit. That's something that's affecting all of us. And I want to just address in more detail how each of your organizations have shifted due to COVID. Obviously, everyone's working from home for the most part, but how has your organization shifted, and what were some of the conscious ideas that you had to think about when you were making that shift? And let's start with Chris.
Definitely. That's a great question, Deena. I think very similar to USDS for a long time, Coding It Forward really prided ourselves in a high touch in-person experience, very similar, go where the work is, be in the room with your users, whether they're residents or the federal employees that they would work with. And so transitioning everyone remote, I think recognizing that the infrastructure of government sometimes will move a little bit differently, and making sure that all of our students had the technologies and the tools that they needed. So making sure that there was funding for if we needed folks to have laptop, hardware, software that they needed to contribute, making sure that they had that. And I think one thing also in responding is looking forward now that colleges and universities across the country have had a litany of reopening plans. Some are in person, some are hybrid, many are still in a remote setting. We heard from so many young people in our network that they weren't necessarily looking forward to taking classes over Zoom. And I think in this moment of national uncertainty with so much going on, they wanted a more direct, concrete way to serve and to make a difference. So for the first time in our short history, we were able to spin up a fall fellowship program. Traditionally, we only bring students in over the summer. And so we'd heard from a couple of hundred students that this is something that they were really interested in, and wicked excited that we'll have 40 fellows starting with us in just under 2 weeks now, working at Census and the National Institutes of Health, which are two agencies that have been in the news for very important reasons. And so I think moving very concretely to make sure that young people could meet the moment where it is. And I think I just wanted to mention lastly, we had a couple of students this summer who were at other parts of Health and Human Services who are working on and directly supporting the efforts to aggregate, disseminate information about COVID research and all of that. And so I think from a very concrete way, that was another way that our organization was able to respond.
And that's awesome, Chris. Andrea, what about from your perspective?
So USDS, we luckily have been able to we've been able to support on board remotely for almost 30 candidates since March, which is normally how many people we actually bring on board yearly. So that's been amazing. Our agency teams have pivoted to remote onboarding experiences for all new hires, which has just been great. And everything's been running smoothly, which is something that has just helped us with our COVID response and how we sit within, the White House and where we're positioned. We're able to actually just go in and support a lot of different agencies across the board. And I think most government agencies right now have some type of COVID response going on. So whenever we're selecting those projects, we really kind of pivot back to what is the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people and the greatest amount of need, and figuring out, our personnel capacity and how we can help support that. But we do still have long-term engagements going on at various agencies that still need coverage. So it's a balance between those two. But I would say we've been able to grow during this time and provide that USDS experience to individuals who might have taken a little bit longer to get here because they live across the country, and that logistically was a little bit more difficult to make happen.
Excellent. And Zarin, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, from our perspective, and I'll focus a bit on what we've done internally at the organization with the shift for COVID, as Cassandra noted, we're also now all working remotely. And so some of the things we did is how do we enable setup for people with remote? So, provided a stipend, but also told people, take what you need, right? Different, I think sometimes what's hard with people policies or is how to be equitable in it, because people start from different baselines on it. So we said, here's the baseline, and if you need more, just let us know. We did something similar for just providing flexibility, because everyone's navigating their own personal situations at a time. We're similar to Andrea, like we're hiring a lot and our work has increased, right? So we gave people managers like a customized list of the types of things that they could have conversations with their team members about, as a way to basically put in place things or adapt those things as, you know, things keep evolving for each of us, on what do they need to be able to show up to work effectively. I think the basic premise that we have tried to do is, again, let's use empathy and let's use that with our employees and see what's going to be needed for you in that moment, right? So we always do engagement surveys, and we did more of those. Like we did pulse checks with people, right? Just to see where people were in the moment. And as a result of that, we put in some additional wellness benefits for people in the organization, including mental health benefits at this time. We just provided more training and support with managers on how to show up with people effectively. We increased our communications as senior leadership to staff because there wasn't that cohesiveness as you would get if you're just walking around or having a water cooler chat. And we also, like mid-year, we amended our performance review process, right? Like we made it strengths-based only because it was at a moment where people were already navigating a lot of turmoil in their lives. And so we're like, let's focus on strengths and how could we leverage that? One of my favorite things we've done though is we, one of our traditions when new hires were coming on, because we're onboarding a bunch of new hires remotely as well, is we used to give them a swag, like, you know, our track jacket, a water bottle, our socks when they started, and you would get that in person at Weekly Wins. Now there's a Photoshop slide of them getting that exact same thing when they start, which is just a lovely way to create one levity, but also a connection to how we were before, which has been super fun. So let's find those moments that allow you to feel connected still as a team, but keep the people who you're working with in mind, and everyone's going through something different.
And that is great. First of all, congratulations to all of you in your organizations for being able to adapt during the COVID times. It hasn't been easy for everyone. And one thing that I wanted to point out and highlight is that, one, the whole thing with mental health during this time period, it's so great to see organizations helping individuals with their mental health. And another aspect is also helping them get the access that they need. We take Wi-Fi and having internet for granted. A lot of areas and a lot of people don't have access to internet. They don't have a laptop. So being able to provide for your employees and individuals is very important, and kudos to all of you for that. And I want to shift a little bit because we're talking about COVID from an employee perspective, but now I want to talk about it from an organization and output perspective. So because we're all still working from home and basically in quarantine, I do want to ask, how have your organizations been serving people, or what I would call your clients, during this time? Chris, can we start with you? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You know, the government is not remote friendly, and slowly they're becoming remote friendly. And like I mentioned, I'll only speak from our people HR perspective, but our partners have really gone above and beyond to ensure that, I know my previous example, just our new hires are just having a great experience. They're able to obtain all of their assets remotely, promptly before their first day, all of these things that sometimes did not happen in person, which is crazy. So it's just warming to me that we're actually almost able to provide a better experience remotely right now for all of our new hires versus in person. So that's just my quick take on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to, I think I mentioned a little bit about how some of our fellows and folks related to Coding It Forward have addressed it kind of outwardly. I think more on an inward, I wanted to recognize a couple of other organizations that I know kind of folks in Coding It Forward, our fellows, have been engaged with that have been serving people in COVID times, as we've seen kind of state unemployment portals crashing under the weight of folks trying to file for unemployment, for example. It's organizations and efforts like the United States Digital Response. It's an all volunteer effort that it's bringing technologists in to partner with governments at any level, local, state, county, federal, to make sure that they have the talent at the end of the day to process test results, to do contact tracing, to support absentee registration and voting. And so I think wanted to make sure that we threw that out there as another organization that is doing really important work around technology as related to COVID.
Thanks. And from our side, some of our programs have expanded dramatically during these times. So for example, Get Cal Fresh, which is a program that allows people to get food assistance in California, saw volumes that were 4 times, what we would normally have seen, because the need just increased pretty dramatically, unfortunately, given COVID. So, we've definitely been increasing a lot of our programs around the safety net, like Get Cal Fresh. We have a program called Get Your Refund, which also allowed people to get their stimulus checks, as well as EITC tax credits. So all of those have seen significant increases. We took on a new program called Pandemic EBT, which allowed people to get food credits or food assistance, especially when kids were no longer in school, right? So the school lunches that you would normally get, and with schools shutting down, those did not exist anymore. So I think one of the things that has kept a lot of us motivated is you definitely see the need for an organization like ours or others in the ecosystem to really support people where they need it at the moment. And then also our brigade volunteers, which there are 90 chapters across the country around, have also done some tremendous work in showing up in their communities and serving local needs at this time, which has been really gratifying to see as well. Deena, I think you're muted.
You may have to hit, there you go.
Can you hear me now? Great. I was just saying thank you all for your perspectives from a COVID perspective. I do want to shift gears to another issue that has been plaguing us in 2020, and that's the racial injustice situations that have occurred. As we all know, it's just some main examples are justice for Breonna Taylor and the murder of George Floyd, and race has been a forefront issue in our lives. And not only in our lives, but also in the workplace. So not only are individuals calling for more diversity in the workplace, but companies and organizations are doubling down on their diversity initiatives and goals. So I want to ask each of you to provide the audience with specific initiatives that your organization has taken in regard to diversity. I know that's a tough question. Andrea, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that we feel very passionately about at USDS, and just a few different things that we are tackling around this. So, we actually have in-house recruiters, and I would say about half of them focus just on reaching out to different groups, so minority groups, ethnicities, all of those different types of things. And the bulk of individuals that come into USDS are referrals. So that is such an important piece, is that outreach and spreading that word of mouth. And then also, we are attending conferences that focus on underrepresented groups. So Afro Tech, Lesbians Who Tech, and last week we participated in Black is Tech. And so just those are just to name a few. And like I said, it's just getting the word out there, because I did not know what civic tech was. I didn't know what a software engineer was, because my family, my dad is an immigrant. He didn't go to college. How would I know what that is? And so until I fell into this space and became aware, I had no idea. And so really building that brand awareness is so important. And I will say, like you mentioned, right now is a little bit of a difficult time. So right now, I would say we have a lot of efforts and putting a lot of effort and initiatives behind this, but we're not doing the best in that diversity and inclusion space. And I think, you know, owning that and really just kind of making it publicly known, and then, you know, just striving to be better is something that, you know, we're doing every single day.
To follow Andrea, I think very similarly, our goal at Coding It Forward every year is to recruit fellowship classes and cohorts that strongly represent and look like the people that they're serving. And at the end of the day, that's all the folks, everyone who lives in the United States. And so making sure that there is that representation, I think, has continuously been our North Star since we founded Coding It Forward back in 2017. In terms of outreach, we recognize that awareness of civic tech is low just across the board, but I think there are definitely differential levels of that across different groups. And so in our recruiting every cycle, we are very focused on making sure that when we're reaching out to students across the country, that we're targeting affinity groups, and that we're reaching out specifically to groups like the National Society for Black Engineers, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers out in STEM, women in computer science, to make sure that they can see the work that we're doing at Coding It Forward and the mission and why it is that civic tech is so important. And one thing that we've been trying to do more recently is to take a look at our recruitment and our application steps and understand at each stage, are there elements of unconscious bias that we can eliminate, and making sure that our review and our selection process is as objective as possible, and kind of screening out any potential for things to creep in there. And then I think from diversity standpoint, in another perspective, one thing in recruiting students that we're really cognizant of is socioeconomic status in access as well. And so making sure that we're reaching out to not just universities like Harvard, where I graduated, but public institutions, colleges that are not on maybe the East or West coasts and maybe are more in the Midwest or in the South. And so those are two other elements that are really important to us to make sure that the movement that we're building is as representative as it can be. As Andrea mentioned, we recognize there's still work to be done, but it's work that we're deeply committed to.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Chris and Andrea said. It's diversity and representation is incredibly important at Code for America, and inclusion is also really important. It's just as important when, you know, we should definitely look at our hiring pipeline, and we also have done a lot to make sure we are getting people into the pipeline from a hiring process that are representative. And, you know, what happens once somebody is in that hiring process and once they've joined the organization, what happens then as well is also incredibly important. So similar to Chris, I think we've done a lot around looking at our hiring process to see how that could be as equitable as possible. One of the things that we have put in place as of a few years ago is the Rooney Rule, basically, which is, you know, whenever somebody comes on site, or the panel that comes on site, is there at least one candidate in that pool that furthers us towards our diversity goals as an organization, which is important. We also think through, you know, just, I say always, like, measure what matters to you in this. And so one of the things that I've been proud of is we look at our engagement survey, which I've talked about also pretty deeply, and look at it with a breakdown of like race and gender to see if there are any disparities that are being created in people's experiences. And in performance reviews and promotions and salary increases, we do retros, right, on demographic data to see if we've unintentionally created inequities in our processes and systems. So I think those are the types of things that we're doing across the board. And then I think there's an element of also just the support that you provide to employees who, come into your organization. So we have like one thing for us, but we have an employee resource group called Earth Tones, which is for people of color, which also at times allows people to find a sense of community as things at times continue to be heavy in the world and in our lives.
And Darren, you brought up a very great point around measurement, and I just want to take a second and have us all zoom out for a second and just think of tech in general. In general, we obviously know that companies aren't releasing their diversity numbers, and no one wants to show them and doesn't want to share. So I do want to circle back around measurement, and Darren, let's start with you around what are you measuring, and if there's any diversity and inclusion reporting that your organization does.
Yeah, so we do have a report, it's on our website, that we share related to our diversity statistics. And so it looks at race, gender, intersectionality, as well as a breakdown between, by department and by leadership. What does that look like? And then we also, that gets put out on an annual-ish basis, but we also do a report out to our board on a quarterly basis, which includes all of those numbers. And monthly, we look at it as a leadership team. The other stat that we look at internally, which we haven't published as much, is people who have lived experience with some of the work that we do. That's also pretty important to us as we think about what diversity looks like in creating products and programs that really do serve the people who are impacted by them. And so the lived experience is also something we try to recruit for and also look at from a measurement standpoint.
And so since 2018, USDS has been reporting diversity data. Some years it's better than others. But one thing that I'm very proud of is that our organization is represented 50% female, as well as our leadership. But going into that, being a government organization, there are some challenges there. The government only recognizes 2 genders. The government only recognizes about a handful of ethnicities and 2 races. And that is not how we identify ourselves. That is not how Americans identify themselves. So, our diversity report is also on our website at the bottom at our footer, newly updated. And so you're able to access that. But as we were going through and collecting this information this year, it really came to us, this is not who we are, but this is all the information we have. So right now we're in the midst of reassessing and collecting demographic information from our employees in a safe way and private way that we can accurately report out in what USDSers look like and who we are. So that's something that's really exciting and really tackles the issues that we face. And I know that there was a comment in the chat around the census and what they recognize and all of those things. So we're doing some work on our end, and we'll see what ripple effects come out of that. And one of those potentially could be, pay inequalities and things like that. So it's exciting, hard, but like I said, it's just making that information readily available and tackling the hard problems.
For us at Coding It Forward, I will say that we have not reported diversity data in the past. It's something that we're actually very much in the process of doing right now, and hoping that in the next week or 2 that we'll be able to follow in the footsteps of Code for America, USDS, to organizations that we look up to, in being able to share information about not just our fellows, because that is public, we kind of show everyone who's participating in our programs, but more of that pipeline and that funnel, and making sure that the funnel is representative, not just at the top and at the bottom, but at every stage along the way. And so making sure that we're measuring that and we have that data, and is something that we're looking forward to sharing. And I think even more looking forward to improving what is depicted in the report.
Great information, everyone. it is time to shift gears a little bit because there are a lot of great questions that are coming from our conversation today. And since we're still on the conversation around workplace and inclusion in the environment, I saw a great question from Amy who wanted to talk about retention at your organizations, as well as burnout and silos are common in government and can land on tech resources heavily. So can some of you or all of you speak to that a little bit?
So burnout is something that does happen, especially I think as we're sitting at home and working more than ever. And, I think it kind of goes back to some things both Zarin and Chris mentioned, but just focusing on the people and really emphasizing, take a step back, find the boundaries in your life and really make sure that you are creating space for work and then space for personal lives. And at USDS, since COVID has happened, we actually have seen a decrease in individuals leaving our organization. And so I think that comes to, a lot of different reasons because of, economic situations. And also there's a lot of good work to be done. And we try to provide a supportive environment, especially at this difficult time. Come to work, bring as much as you can, but also, make sure your family is first, your personal health is first. And so really emphasizing that weekly, daily, hourly, whatever is needed is something that we really push. And so I feel like, there is still that, burnout, but really focusing on the people to make sure that they're taking care of themselves to prevent that.
All right, we only have about 5 or 6 more minutes left. So I want to ask because there are additional questions. So another question, I'm a white PhD level researcher at a policy research institute. I welcome giving coffee and having informational interviews anytime I connect with folks earlier in their career. However, I'm disproportionately reached by folks whose backgrounds and identities are already well represented in the policy space. So what are ways that his institution and himself can intentionally work to broaden the range of contacts to help foster connections and sometimes hire folks from underrepresented groups?
And think about, I think, folks early in your career, it's really hard to understand the network aspect. You kind of reach out to people, the people who are in spaces. And so to the questioner, I would say be intentional about reaching out to a couple of universities with programs that might have demographics that look different than your institution, and reaching out and saying, hey, I want to be a resource. Here's my contact information. And sometimes even that seems straightforward, but as a student and you don't know really where to turn, and someone reaches out and makes themselves available, it removes that first barrier that would say, hey, I don't know who to start with. So I think that would be something. I've seen a lot of great things on social media where people will maybe tweet and say, hey, this is what my expertise is, and I really would love to chat with folks from this background, and either here's my email, here's a link to a calendar there where you can sign up for 15-20 minutes, and just kind of putting that out there and having people share that with their communities, I think have been 2 ways that I've seen personally be fairly successful.
I think too, just to add on to what Chris mentioned, is that you have to meet people where they are. So just make sure you're going out to those communities and those environments for the people that you're seeking. You have to put yourself out there and also meet them. So I think that's another tidbit of advice. Another question we have from the audience is, what's the most exciting thing about jumping into civic tech? And before I have you guys answer, everyone, just a reminder, if you do have questions, put it in the Q&A so that I can see them and make sure they're answered. So again, question right now is, what's the most exciting thing about jumping into civic tech?
I can take that to start. I think it's you're working to make a difference pretty concretely and make a difference in the lives of many people. And some of that, when you see civic tech work incredibly well, you can see the positive impact that it has. And unfortunately, also with the pandemic, you can see the needs. in some of those areas pretty acutely. And so I think that is frankly the most exciting thing, is the mission and being able to work with some amazing people who care about that mission incredibly deeply.
And to maybe piggyback off of Zarin, I think one thing that we've talked around but maybe not mentioned explicitly is just how human-centered civic tech is, and making sure that people are always, and so for me, one of my favorite memories in civic tech is just sitting down and actually talking to the people that would use or engage with something that I was building or being a part of, and seeing whether it's their eyes light up and like, this is much better than the status quo. This is something that would make a meaningful difference. And I think engaging to someone on a person-to-person level reminds you how deep an impact civic tech can have. And it's easy sometimes to just get lost in the abstract. Oh, I'm going to build this or that, but understanding who's on the other side of that.
Yeah, and then I would just add, because both of those are great points, just the amazing people you meet and the different experiences they bring to the table. And just, I'm so fascinated by my colleagues, by the people I've been able to just like meet and chat with by joining USDS. It's just amazing, and everyone is super passionate about what they do and sharing their stories, which is great.
Thank you, guys. We have two more questions. First one, my grandson is 10. How do I inspire him and his fellow students trust to connect to solve difficult problem situations they will encounter into the future?
I don't get them involved in videos, TED Talks, chats. I've witnessed some really cool competitions of young kids implementing technology and things like that. And so I think that's so inspiring. And I always think back, what would I be doing if I started that young? So.
Yeah, and I think I would add, like, let's find connection spots for them. I was also thinking, like, we have our brigade volunteer network, but I know, like, we had a national day of civic hacking that just happened where people could like do teardowns, and my daughter, who's 7, just joined me for parts of it and was really interested in figuring out what all of that meant, right? So I think if there are opportunities through volunteer chapters, et cetera, to get them a smattering of what that could look like, that could be pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think training a mindset, one thing that we've seen a lot of is that children actually do really well that applies to civic tech is the notion of asking why, and asking why multiple times. And it might be annoying, but really helping them drill down into kind of what some of those problems are and how get them thinking about how that works. And one thing that I will say, maybe not directly related, but I love every time you kind of go to the polls and you see parents who are bringing their children with them into the voting booth, and kind of the act of voting, and kind of instilling early how important that is to solving in our civic processes, or to solving a lot of the problems that we're facing. And so with the big election in November, now might be a great time for them to see democracy in action as well.
All right, we have one more question and we have to make it quick. So let's stay under 1 minute. So change is hard for everyone, including the government. How do you work to make incremental change without losing sight of complete digital transformation? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. I think that change is hard and change is not impossible, right? Like, and that's what is important to note is, I think what we have to remember is people who work in government are also inspired to make a difference in the lives of their public constituents. Like, that's what it is. So one of the things that we feel like we do is help enable how you can do that in an effective way. And sometimes those changes are incremental. Sometimes you're taking not just like, here's how you do it, but also help you figure out how to do that yourself. And so those gradual little moments actually do add up to something big, but always remembering that the people who are working on it have good intentions to do that.
I think, as Zarin mentioned, momentum is so important. Little changes snowball in government, and you kind of can see the results of good work. So moving in the positive direction, not letting good be perfect be the enemy of the good, I think are all tenets that I've seen.
Great, and that is a great note to end on. Thank you all from a panelist perspective for everything that you've provided to the audience today. And Javita, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I just wanted to to wrap things up. We would love for you all to stay in touch, and the ways that you can do that are by visiting our blog, where you can take a look at our work, follow along. And you can also feel free, you can always donate. That is always welcomed. And you can do that at codeforamerica.org/donate. And you can check out our other events. We have a ton of great events that we host on a monthly basis, and we always enjoy talking to each and every one of you. And you can always follow us on Twitter. And with that, I just want to say thank you all for joining this discussion. Thank you, Deena, for being an amazing moderator. And thank you to all of our amazing hosts or our panelists. And just remember that we'll post the recording on our YouTube channel, and you can find us on all of these other channels as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And so thank you for joining, and we will talk to you all soon.